Hello, welcome to our second of this academic year, Fashion Means Business Fashion Talks. Today we're going to focus on disruption, resilience and opportunity for retailers in 2021. According to McKinsey, the current COVID-19 pandemic is acting as a catalyst for change, with the crisis likely to accelerate the shift to digital and shape up the business landscape. Travel restrictions and social distancing has meant a greater reliance on technology by businesses. And it's predicted that the pandemic is accelerating the fourth industrial revolution. The pandemic demands the fashion industry shift its business models and strategies to mitigate the downside risk of doing business while being positioned to exploit the opportunities. One key risk that requires managing is the need for fashion businesses to adopt leaner and more agile supply chains. And this has resulted in fashion businesses shifting their attention to product lifecycle management. It's with great pleasure that I welcome today Nate Fleming, Vice President Marketing of Bamboo Rose, who's going to give us further insights into product lifecycle management. Welcome, Nate. Thank you for joining us.
Great. Thank you, Hannah. Thank you for having me. And thank you everyone for joining and for your interest today. As Hannah alluded to, my name is Nate Fleming. I'm the Vice President of Marketing at Bamboo Rose. I'm based out of Boston, Massachusetts. Have been with Bamboo Rose for about 2 years, working on marketing, strategy, and really industry analysis. And so excited to talk to the group today about what I've seen in recent months and weeks as retail and fashion has really experienced an undeniably turbulent and challenging year. But I think what I've started to see in the second half of the year in Q3 and Q4 is the start of innovation and opportunity and change in retail in reaction to some of the challenges that we've seen in the first half of the year. So obviously, even in recent days and weeks, we've seen additional tough news for retailers, but I also think we've seen a lot of opportunity for innovation, and we've started to see retailers taking action, making investments, and really getting ready for 2021 and looking to succeed in 2021. So just a little bit more about Bamboo Rose. We're a global software company that works closely with retailers, brands, and manufacturers, helping them really ideate, develop, and deliver products to market as quickly as possible and at the highest margin possible. And so if you look at our community of clients and partners, we have about over 250,000 users on our platform. We have more than 50,000 client and partner companies collaborating and interacting on our platform. And there's more than $1.2 trillion in product that's managed within our platform annually. And you'll see we call ourselves the only multi-enterprise platform for the retail and supplier community. I'll talk a little bit more about what that means on the next slide. So when I talk about a multi-enterprise platform, it's really this vision that the Bamboo Rose founders had about 2 decades ago. They were former fashion and retail industry professionals. They worked in sourcing and logistics and product management. And they saw a lot of opportunity around the ability to collaborate closely with your deep ecosystem of business partners in the retail environment. So they experienced a lot of challenges collaborating and transacting with their various business partners in their retail jobs. And they saw an opportunity to bring digital connection and collaboration between those partners to really drive a lot of value for retailers internationally. And within that multi-enterprise platform architecture, we have 5 business applications that support 5 specific business processes. So first and foremost is our B2B marketplace. That's a solution where you can quickly discover and collaborate with suppliers on product assortment. Once you've gone through that process, identified suppliers, identified products, we have PLM and sourcing applications that allow you to design and price that product, ensure the quality of that product, and also ensure the compliance of that product and the legality of that product based on what market you're selling it into. From there, we have an order management capability that really helps retailers to transact with their suppliers and other supply chain partners from a financial perspective. And then finally, we have a global trade management application that allows our clients to easily manage the logistics of product, moving product from freight carriers to distribution centers, moving product from factories to freight carriers, and also maintaining the compliance of that product around import and export from different regions and geographies. So that's really our technology backbone. But a lot of what I'll talk about today are the business dynamics that our technology supports, as well as the processes and skills and strategies that we see retailers needing to be successful in this incredibly challenging and really new era in retail that we've seen in recent months and weeks. So if you look at Bamboo Rose's client base, and then I'll sort of move on to those industry dynamics, you'll see that we play across the retail spectrum. We support hardlines retailers, we support food retailers, but really at our core has always been fashion and apparel. Those are the industries that our founders came from. And so you'll see in that second column, we work closely with brands like Lululemon, with retailers like Gap, with the retailer and brand American Eagle Outfitters, some smaller brands like ModCloth, Urban Outfitters, and Eddie Bauer. So have deep experience working closely with apparel retailers on their specific business problems and challenges. And it's certainly specifically for that product category and industry within retail, it's been an especially challenging year, and I'll talk a lot about that today. Additionally, I should mention our client base tends to be retailers over $500 million in revenue, typically north of $1 billion in revenue, with a large amount of SKUs and complex supply chain dynamics. We found that the nature of our software, the nature of our platform, the business problems that our clients encounter really only emerge as they scale and grow from maybe a mid-sized retailer to an enterprise retailer or brand. So industry dynamics that we've seen over the last 12 months. So there are 5 big themes that I'll cover here. And then once I've talked through these, I'll dive into some data that goes a little deeper on each of these themes, unpacks them a little bit, and starts to hit on some of the ways that we've seen retailers managing or leveraging these themes to be successful during this time. And then from there, we'll run through some case studies that will outline some ways that we're seeing our clients actually take action on these themes, leveraging, again, our software, but also ways that they're able to collaborate deeply with their business partners, ways they've adjusted their processes, ways that they've thought about their skills and their digital strategy as an organization. So really a much deeper conversation than just technology, but technology is an input to it, certainly. So the first theme on the top left, and I think one of the most important and interesting to me, is really the realization of a need to develop new revenue streams and new business models. We've seen retailers and brands really continue to be pretty focused on in-store sales over the last decade, despite the understanding that e-commerce at some point will become a much larger piece of their revenue pie. And so now in recent weeks and months, we've seen a lot of scrambling to catch up from that perspective, despite the fact that they had years and years to prepare for this dynamic. Just last week in the States was Thanksgiving, which was also really the kickoff to holiday shopping. And if you look at some of the statistics we've seen, digital sales were up 21% over last year, while in-store sales obviously dropped rapidly. Stores in the United States aren't closed, but there's certainly restrictions on the number of people that can enter the store. And we're seeing a large chunk of the population that certainly isn't interested in shopping in store. And so we've really seen that move to e-commerce spending. Online spending year over year has been up 23%. And again, that's coming directly out of that in-store sales into digital, but also reflects the fact that there's some sales in there that are being lost. There's certainly a significant gap there. And then finally, 52% of shoppers said they'd consider using curbside pickup. To this point, from my perspective, curbside pickup was still a fairly niche service that retailers were just starting to roll out. And now we're seeing it as a major channel for retailers. And so they really have to react to that and manage that. In addition to meeting customers in new channels, I think there's also a dynamic where we're seeing brands and manufacturers and retailers also looking at whole new markets. We've seen some of our clients and we've seen the broader market really look to sell more to other businesses, adopt B2B strategies, and also stand up new brands or products quickly to react to changing dynamics in the market and changing consumer needs. Excuse me. So the next theme I'll hit on is really around supply chain visibility to drive diversification. I think if you look at 2019, this theme was already emerging pretty rapidly. Retailers are interested in diversifying their supplier base internationally so that they aren't too reliant on one region to source their products and continue their operations. This was exacerbated in 2019 by the trade wars we saw between the United States and China. So a lot of our stateside clients were really looking at ways they could discover suppliers outside of China to avoid some of the tariffs they were encountering through transacting with those suppliers. Obviously, in 2020, that became even more extreme with COVID-19. The pandemic initially started in China, and as such, we saw a lot of our clients' suppliers in that region shut down for weeks and months. And I think the initial concern for retailers before the pandemic spread was, how am I going to maintain my inventories? How am I going to maintain my supply chain operations as I see shutdowns overseas? And so we see and continue to see a lot of aspiration to build out a supplier base in new regions and really deepen the supplier base so that they aren't too reliant on a single supplier or a single region to bring product to market. Related to that very much is the need for deep collaboration with suppliers. To this point, we still saw a heavy usage of in-person meetings, or rather up to 2020, we still saw a heavy reliance on in-person meetings, on overseas buying trips for different merchandise categories based on buying calendars. And so we still saw quite a bit of spend and time going into traveling overseas and meeting with your suppliers in person. Even prior to COVID, we saw a lot of opportunity to supplement that. Obviously, it's much quicker, more efficient, more affordable to do a lot of that collaboration online. Maybe you still meet in person with someone eventually, but getting a lot of that collaboration and interaction done digitally first, we saw as a big opportunity. And now with business travel really being shut down for the foreseeable future, we see a much deeper need and much more traction with our clients who are interested in deepening their ability to collaborate with their supplier base on product ideas, on sampling, on adjustments to products, an array of different themes that they used to cover in in-person buying trips and things of that nature. The next one, and this is a little more technology focused, is the need for system resilience. Essentially, the technology and processes that allow for a business to continue to operate stably and efficiently despite major disruptions, such as, for example, buying trips being shut down, for example, the ability to travel into the office no longer being a possibility. So we found that the broader retail market was a little bit ill prepared for this and really needed better adoption of cloud technologies and cloud tools that allowed their stakeholders to log on from home, to log on using the web, to not require a VPN, to not require sort of logging onto a traditional server. And we saw some clients that were very successful because of deeper maturity there, and others that really struggled, and the broader market that really struggled because they didn't have that resilience around operations and technology to support major disruption as we saw in the last 12 months. And then finally, we've seen a lot of demand for industry network adoption. And this relates back a little bit to that multi-enterprise platform concept, which is really essentially the need to have most of the business partners from your industry available on a single technology platform to connect and transact with. And the amount of efficiency and opportunity and margin growth that can drive is really incredible. So we've seen a big drive for that and a big interest in that. And I'll speak to it a little bit more later, but it essentially allows for not just more efficient collaboration with your core partners that you've already worked with, but also the discovery of new partners that can drive new products to your shelves, that can help you innovate on a fabric, that can help you get product to market a little bit more affordably because of a new carrier relationship or a new trade agent relationship. So now that I've run through these themes, I'll hit on some data points that support these and talk about how we've seen retailers take action to execute on some of these. So first, this is a survey that Bamboo Rose actually did in collaboration with Coresight Research, which is an industry analyst firm that focuses on retail and apparel. What we really wanted to understand with this survey was, and this was run back in, I believe, May or June, was, how has COVID impacted your priorities? What priorities have maintained despite COVID, and what priorities have emerged? And so you'll see here, we asked about their most pressing business issue over the next 12 to 24 months. And we saw some really interesting things elevate here. So first and foremost was supply chain agility and flexibility. And a little bit more about what that means. Essentially, the capability to manage disruptions or challenges in your supply chain and quickly skirt those without major operational delays. So this might mean quickly identifying a new freight partner. It might mean quickly understanding how a new tariff might impact the total cost of your product, and if it's worth staying in that region despite the tariff, or if it's worth looking into maybe expanding your supplier base or moving to a different supplier in a different region who might be slightly more expensive, but when you account for the tariff, they're actually a more affordable option. And the ability to take those actions and get those insights and access that data very quickly to make those decisions in minutes and hours, not days and weeks. And that sounds like a pretty basic capability, but when you look at enterprise retailers with large technology footprints, with geographically distributed teams, with very siloed departments because they're such large organizations, the ability to access really vital supply chain data, to understand context on supply chain partners, and then to make decisions based on that information, it actually can be pretty challenging for some organizations. The second one we hit on, or the second one you'll see here that we hit on earlier, was really this, the ability to innovate on business model and to identify new revenue streams to really bolster some of the revenue that clients or the broader market saw lost in the first half of the year due to some of the challenges we saw. And then some other interesting ones that we'll talk a little bit more about later on. Really continued interest in sustainability and corporate social responsibility. And then also interest in sort of supply chain transparency and traceability as clients in the broader market look to manage the compliance of their supply chain partners, understand the ethical dynamics of their supply chain partners, and making sure they're not violating any national regulations around those dynamics. Just to hit a little bit more on the revenue stream concept we see here as the second input on the graphic. I talked about the emergence of curbside pickup, the emergence of e-commerce, things that have been around for a long time, but retailers probably hadn't invested in as much as they needed to, or really treated as their primary selling channel until they had to in the last 12 months. And it sounds, I think at the outset, it sounds simple. You build out an e-commerce footprint, you hire a digital advertising team, and then why should it be so challenging to sell digitally rather than in the store? But what we've seen is there's so many operational challenges that go into that, and also really challenges around creating a great customer experience. If you think about who retailers are competing with, the Amazons of the world, the Walmarts of the world, really the way that you differentiate is through customer experience. It's through fast delivery and efficient delivery of product and goods. And that can be a real challenge for traditional retailers. And it's not as simple as just adding an e-commerce footprint. That really requires a lot of digitization of your supply chain, digitization of your ordering, visibility across store inventories. And these are traditionally very siloed departments, very siloed activities. But the ability to really move product through your supply chain efficiently and intelligently to get that product to the customer's front door or to the curb for a customer to pick up while still maintaining your margins has been very challenging for many retailers during this time. So even as we've seen, digital sales at least accelerate, that doesn't mean that retailers are necessarily making as much profit off of those sales, first. And second, they still aren't necessarily driving great experiences for their end consumers that cause those consumers to return to those retailers week after week, year after year. And so we see a lot of importance in sort of digitizing the back end, digitizing supply chain operations, creating visibility into supply chain operations, connecting supply chain decision-making with inventory levels at different stores and fulfillment centers as really key to driving successful e-commerce initiatives. We've seen some of our clients be successful there, and we've seen some members of the broader market really struggle there. So the next dynamic, this one focuses more in on that sort of buying trip and supplier collaboration theme that I hit on a little while ago. And so you'll see this data on the left is from Digital Commerce 360. It's a publication that really focuses in on e-commerce for both B2C and B2B activities. And what you'll see here is really an increased adoption of B2B marketplaces in the last 6 to 12 months, increased interest in transacting on B2B marketplaces in the last 6 to 12 months. And this is for obvious reasons. Essentially, retailers, brands, manufacturers have been forced into this dynamic because their traditional selling channels have been shut down for the time being. And it's not surprising that we see this dynamic. You know, oftentimes if you look at an industry, if you look at how different industries behave, especially those that involve consumers, you'll see trends emerge first on the consumer side. So we've obviously seen a high prevalence of e-commerce, of digital transaction on the consumer side for well over a decade. And then a much slower adoption on the business side. And we see that again here with B2B marketplaces, but you know, we're seeing this massive change and disruption in the market really push B2B marketplaces forward. And again, in the short term, it's a negative, it's a challenge, it's hurting global economies, it's causing people to lose jobs, which is terrible. But in the long term, it will drive innovation and maturity in some of these industries that really needed to grow and learn and change the way they operated to be successful in the modern retail economy that we live in today. Another interesting piece that I saw from McKinsey recently that really hits on the same topic. Not only are B2B marketplaces accelerating in terms of their prevalence, in terms of their relevance, but there's also increasing confidence to do large transactions on these platforms. So this stat on the right shows that about 70% of respondents to this survey indicated that they would spend more than $50,000 on a self-service or remote or digital interaction. And 99% acknowledge that they would be adopting some level of digital B2B marketplace in 2020 and beyond. So again, we've seen short-term disruption, but in the long term, we see adoption of new practices and tools that are likely going to move the retail industry forward and drive success for those that survive this challenging time. The next piece is around corporate social responsibility. So I think an interesting dynamic we've seen, certainly in the United States, has been that COVID has accelerated the expectation that private institutions must play a role in public health and environmental health. And for better or for worse, I think we live in a world where it's not just up to governments, but also up to corporations to drive responsibility about, again, not just a global health crisis, but also broader environmental concerns that are going to disrupt their customers' lives as well as their operations and their ability to be successful ultimately. And so we see this, this sentiment really across geographies, across cultures. Most consumers agree that they really expect environmental awareness and environmentally friendly operations, deeper efficiency in terms of supply chain strategy and supply chain operations from the retailers they buy from. And this is increasingly becoming a differentiating dynamic where oftentimes consumers are choosing retailers based partially on their level of supply or of corporate social responsibility, based on that brand's reputation in the market, from an ethical, environmental, and emissions perspective. And I've alluded to all the disruption and change that's happened, and I think it's an interesting moment. Certainly, CSR was a high priority for retail and fashion boards and executive teams prior to COVID. But as I alluded to, we've seen so much change, so much disruption, so much shift in terms of how retailers operate. We see this as a great opportunity to take some of those CSR concepts that retailers have been talking about for the last 5 to 10 years and really put them into action. Take advantage of this moment of change and openness to innovation and bring in some deeper CSR strategies. And I'll hit on one of those in a little bit in one of the case studies. And then finally, resilience. I touched on this a little bit. Resilience is really the ability from a technology, process, skill set perspective, culture perspective to maintain operations, to maintain success, and to even drive forward innovation despite major disruption, whether it be geopolitical, pandemic, environmental, et cetera. And so unfortunately, what we've seen is retail really lags here. It's been a decidedly slow industry in terms of adopting some of these technology tools that might allow you to manage disruption more effectively. And what we've also seen is those retailers that did invest in some of these tools proactively were able to be very, very successful amid this pandemic, while many other of their competitors struggled significantly. And so I think it's one of our goals at Bamboo Rose to work deeply with our client base, to work deeply with the market, to really drive deeper resilience when the next challenge like this emerges, so that there isn't so much revenue loss, there isn't so much inefficiency in terms of the ability to meet customers in these new channels. So again, this is from an Accenture study earlier this year, and it's certainly something that we've seen come up several times in recent weeks and months with prospects as well as with clients. Okay, so now I'm just going to hit on some case studies that kind of build out on some of the concepts we've seen here and show how retailers can take real action, can shift their strategies to be successful despite some of the challenges that they've seen in 2020. So the first case study, this is a major European retailer. They're privately owned. They have a revenue of north of $25 billion and very focused on the apparel and fashion industries and have a global footprint, certainly. And it's a firm that is very pragmatic, that knew, whose executive team has known for a long time that their current business model that focuses on in-store shopping, that focuses more on fast fashion, just knows that won't necessarily be successful forever, that there have to be new strategies, new business models, new customer bases, both B2C and B2B, to make them successful for the next 20 and 50 years. And so they also knew that there was a broad demand from the public and from their own executive team to embrace deeper sustainability initiatives and deeper corporate social responsibility. Again, not just for consumers, but also for the broader health of their organization and the ability for their organization to function profitably. And then finally, as many fashion retailers talk about, there was a need to maintain agility to consumer trends and fast changing consumer expectations, not just in terms of the channels consumers are buying from, but also style and broader fashion trends. And so this company's been working with Bamboo Rose for, I think, over 2 years now. And what they've done is they've developed a digital B2B service that takes their deep supply chain maturity and leverages the oftentimes sustainable supply chain relationships that they've developed overseas because of their scale and because of their maturity in the market, and allows smaller brands to access or tap into those operations around product development and supply chain. And so this, again, it takes their corporate social responsibility initiatives and it opens it up to a broader market of smaller brands that maybe couldn't afford to take that level of environmental responsibility. Additionally, it opens up new revenue streams for this organization. They're able to sell this service to smaller brand businesses rather than their primary revenue stream, which is obviously focused on selling products to consumers. And finally, it allows them to, by working closely with these small brands, to maintain more agile and responsiveness to changing consumer trends, which obviously smaller fashion brands are going to be more responsive to than they can be as a large multinational corporation. And so this is a really interesting example to me of a technology sitting in the middle and taking supply chain partners on one side and connecting them with brands on the other. Sort of this many-to-many dynamic we've seen in consumer scenarios with, say, Amazon or eBay or Alibaba, and applying it to a B2B concept. And so we're really excited about this, and we think it's a really good example of deepening corporate social responsibility maturity, but also the ability to innovate on revenue stream and innovate on customer base in a really exciting way. And something that I think becomes more prevalent as B2B revenue streams became much more relevant in 2020. So the next case study, Kohl's is a department store in the United States. They sell apparel, soft goods, hard lines, often located in sort of mini malls or in malls themselves. And Kohl's is a company we've worked with for a long time, but we've been really interested in how the story has evolved with COVID-19 in recent months. And so some of the challenges that Kohl's came to us initially with were really, classic PLM challenges. It was long product development cycles. It was a lot of time and energy interacting with suppliers and collaborating with suppliers and having to input information from suppliers into Excel spreadsheets or emails. It was inefficiency and really a lot of the classic challenges you hear with the PLM software scenario. And so we were thrilled to work with them now, I think for over 10 years, and really help them get their system up and running in about 6 months. They were able to aggregate information from Excel and email files and bring them into Bamboo Roast to drive a lot of efficiency and really a single source of truth as they collaborated on different products they were bringing to market. They did a study, an ROI analysis in early 2019, and they found that using our system, they were able to increase productivity around style setups by 40%. They also saw that their sampling process was improved by about 60%. So really reducing sampling iterations and being more efficient in the physical samples they had to manage. And then, the really interesting piece, though, I think comes around COVID-19 and the ability to manage the COVID-19 crisis, leveraging our system as sort of the technology tool that supported them and their stakeholders as they move to working from home. So first and foremost, because it's a cloud tool, they were able to keep working from home without any disruption, any technology challenges, able to easily use the system from their web browser. But the really interesting piece is that agility and responsiveness to the market, the ability to quickly meet new consumer needs and expectations. So obviously now, a solid chunk of the population is working from home. And this means they have new clothing needs. They're not looking for office wear or formal wear. They're looking for leisure wear. And so what Kohl's has been able to do is stand up a new athleisure brand, FLX, that they're launching in early 2021 to tap into that spend the consumers are going to be doing on athleisure wear that maybe they would have done at another store or with another brand otherwise. And we've seen with Kohl's really a lot of success around building out private brands, and for retailers, I think that's been a big way that they've been able to drive revenue and differentiate from competitors is standing up private brands that can be more profitable, that can drive consumers to the only place they can get the product is from their stores. And so we've seen a lot of success using our system to do that. And with COVID-19, that became even more prevalent and urgent because of that need to be responsive to new customer expectations that have really changed practically overnight. So the next one I think is really interesting and really relevant to the fashion industry. So this really hits on material first innovation and an increasing demand or interest from our client base to leverage materials as a differentiator in the market. And so we've seen a lot of interest in performance materials as broader populations have gotten more interested in fitness, looking for clothing that really fits that need. Again, kind of very linked to that athleisure concept that I mentioned on the last slide. With athleisure or leisure clothing, maybe they're looking for softer materials with athletic gear, maybe they're looking for more of that performance material. But either way, there are people that might come to your store seeking out that specific material that maybe only you can provide. So it can be a great differentiator as trends change and performance materials become a lot more relevant. Additionally, there's the ability to offer recyclable materials. And so, as I hit on, consumers are increasingly seeking out brands that they feel share their values, that are thinking about the environment. And so the ability to offer a recyclable material to the market can really drive certain consumers into your stores. Additionally, there's a lot of opportunity around efficiency with material first innovation and deeper visibility into material quantities across your supply chain. It might mean that you can more effectively plan your product runs to use the exact amount of material that you have available. It means you might not have a miscommunication on the amount of product you can build, or if you're running out of material at one mill, you can maybe ship it from another mill. And so we see a lot of ways that material first innovation and more of a focus on materials can differentiate brands in the market and drive consumer traction, but also save brands money and create more consistency in their supply chain operations and their inventories. But this is a challenging concept. It's a new strategy, and it means a lot of and there's a lot of challenges that come with interacting with your broader supply chain and supplier base and trying to stand these up. So here you'll see, so for mills, there's a lot of difficulty in terms of forecasting the types of materials and the levels of commitment that buyers and suppliers are going to take month over month, year over year. For inspection firms, there are unclear protocols for each inspection site. And there are also issues in taking and assessing disparate data from each client around inspections of different types of materials. For trade agents or trade companies, there are issues around managing disparate material demands across customers, brands, and wholesalers, making sure that they're securing volume pricing for materials across customers, while also making sure they have enough material for each customer. And then for suppliers as well, there are challenges. There's issues managing the quality of product to meet retail standards, and there's issues overseeing delivery of material for production across several factories. And then finally, for the retail buyer themselves, they're potentially taking on the financial burden of each order. They're forecasting and allocating materials to each factory, which takes a lot of context and data input. And they're aligning production, again, with ever-changing market trends and trying to be responsive to market trends, while also proactively developing products so that they can keep their shelves stocked. So we've seen, several of our clients take on this approach with us, and we've seen some exciting results that not just drive value for that core retail client, but also drive value for the broader ecosystem, which again improves adoption of the system and improves data quality. And so for mills, they're able to reduce sourcing lead time, reduce cost, and keep material on hand. For inspection companies, they're able to better understand inspection protocols and more efficiently deliver inspection results to different clients on one platform. And for buyers, they can really, depending on their strategy, they take different benefits. If they aren't proactively buying the material, they can track cost and inventory levels without taking financial responsibility. Or if they've chosen to buy the material up front, they can auto-allocate materials to factories based on trends, production starts, and ports of destination. And so what we really see here is just by driving deeper visibility and context around materials, by allowing these different partners that might work in silos to have visibility into each other's operations around these materials, we see a lot of opportunity for efficiency, for accelerating time to market. And then ultimately, when the product gets to market, we see a lot of opportunity around differentiating from competitors and driving the brand reputation that these different retailers want to, that their boards want to, that their executives want to. Okay, this is the last case study, and it hits on that supplier collaboration and sampling theme that I've hit on. Sampling's been an issue long before COVID-19. It's been a a core value that Bamboo Rose has been able to support or alleviate in terms of making sampling more efficient. But certainly with COVID-19, retail stakeholders are no longer able to be in their offices to receive samples. We've heard about a lot of our clients having to drive into the office, pick up the sample, and then head home, which again, in an already inefficient process of shipping products and goods overseas, which can take days and weeks. Having to drive in to pick up the product from the office just adds another layer of complexity, of inefficiency to that. So again, COVID has just exacerbated this need. And so, typically the challenges we heard around sampling were oversampling, too many iterations, miscommunication on each sample iteration, which meant that there had to be another one, which cost more money, which took more time, which extended the product life cycle longer than it needed to be. We also saw a lot of risk around lost or stolen samples. And we've heard clients, cite losses of millions of dollars because of lost samples, or a risk to IP because a sample was stolen and a competitor maybe can have an insight into what product a retailer is bringing to market for the next season. And then finally, we saw, obviously, as I've alluded to, a high cost of producing physical samples, of shipping physical samples, of storing physical samples, and then trying to track down physical samples in an office. And so, we've seen, again, through digital sampling on Bamboo Rose and through really visibility across the business network, we've seen value that's delivered to all members of the retail community by digitizing samples. And to be clear, that doesn't mean that samples are disappearing altogether. There's still a need for physical samples, but just reducing the amount of physical sampling by 50% could save a lot of time and money. And so some value that we've seen, first of all, we've seen increasing adoption and interest in 3D technologies to augment sampling. And so we've seen a lot of our clients in fashion looking to start to run pilot programs, working closely with their supplier base. We're seeing suppliers run pilot programs where they're using these different 3D technologies to at least take advantage of what those 3D tools are good for and take care of that aspect of the sampling process before they still have to move into that physical sampling. And maybe that means the fit is just a little bit better when you get that first physical sample. Maybe it means the color is just a little bit more accurate to what the retailer or brand was expecting when you get that first physical sample. And that can make a lot of difference. Some other dynamics and value we've seen is, it really keeps projects moving regardless of time zone. The ability to collaborate digitally means instead of weeks between sample iterations, it can be, days between digital sample iterations. We see people leveraging mobile phones to provide input on certain aspects of product samples while on the go. We provide the ability to annotate or comment on samples within the system to alleviate some of that collaboration happening in disparate systems like email or over video chat, where maybe that collaboration is lost and that context is lost later on. And again, it gives partners deeper visibility into what product they need to send to what clients and when, which again, not just drives value for the retailer, but also drives value for those partners, deepens the relationships with those partners, and creates more of those strategic supplier relationships that I think retailers are really looking for right now, as some of those relationships have eroded as a result of COVID-19. So that was my presentation today. I hope it was interesting and engaging, and I now want to open it up to questions. So I think Hannah is going to provide some questions from the audience. But thank you for your time and attention today so far.
Thank you very much, Nate. And actually could not be more appropriate timing when you were talking about the challenges of fashion retailers not being as resilient as other business sectors, when only this week we've had the announcement of both Arcadia and Debenhams going into administration. So I think that's just
exactly
itself of, we've got many businesses, fashion businesses, that are just not resilient enough. And COVID has just highlighted the flaws within those business models. So yeah, thank you. So the chat Q&A box is open. So if you'd like to post any questions, do. I didn't add that Nate's actually calling in from New York, so it's early morning for him. So thank you, Nate.
No problem, Boston. But
Boston,
just
sorry.
a couple hours north.
Yeah.
But yeah, Hannah, I think you're right. It's an interesting moment, and what we saw in the first half of the year was, not necessarily an eagerness to innovate. More sort of trying to maintain costs to sort of last out this challenging time. But I think in the second half of the year, we've seen the market realize this isn't something you can kind of outlast, or it's not going to be a month or 2 months or 3 months, and then we're back to normal. The reality of the industry has changed, and there need to be investments and changes to account for that. And the companies that are willing to make those, I think, are those that will be successful. And the companies that aren't, I think, are going to run into some of the challenges that we've seen in recent days and weeks.
Yeah, and those businesses that have survived COVID and actually flourished in COVID are those that actually had the foresight to invest in product lifecycle management and other software ahead of COVID hitting. So yeah. So any questions? Running to see if any questions are coming in. So Nate, you'd say that sort of in recent months, you've seen an increase in people actually actively seeking out, investing in product lifecycle management and coming to you for advice and guidance.
Yeah, I think we've seen certainly companies realizing they can't wait this out. Obviously there are areas of investment around e-commerce platforms, around distributed order management and last mile fulfillment that are huge priorities for retailers. But I think one of the important dynamics is that you can't just buy those sort of customer facing systems and expect them to work perfectly unless your broader operational processes and strategy are in place to support those. So it's almost an operational bedrock or foundation to support customer facing initiatives. And, I think that's where we step in, and that's where we're able to drive value is by really allowing you to cost efficiently support these new channels to make sure you're not losing money or delaying the supply chain as you stand up these new channels. And I think that's where we step in, and there's resilience dynamic there as well.
Yeah, definitely. And actually, as a university, as a school within the university, we recognize that we need to be equipping our students with the necessary knowledge and expertise going out into the industry and product lifecycle management. I mean, in fact, you approached us initially is an area we need to equip our students with a knowledge of and understanding. And
so, Hannah, I see a couple of questions here. One that definitely is a good one to touch on is, do you believe brands will begin to question the importance of investing in brick and mortar stores? And I think certainly we're seeing, obviously, definitely this year, we're seeing less investment. People aren't looking to open up stores by any means. But I think that, as things hopefully at some point do return relatively to what we knew prior to 2020, there can still be a role for brick and mortar stores. I just think it changes. It's less about high inventory levels and more about experiencing product, understanding what product looks like, and then maybe still having it delivered to your door. It's more about building out the brand. We've seen a lot of stores or a lot of retailers who have focused a lot on, experience-focused stores in urban areas, where it's not so much, again, about just moving product, but more about, telling consumers what the brand cares about, what the brand's values are. And then in the interim as well, an interesting dynamic we're seeing across retail product categories is, stores can play new roles. They can be, more of a distribution channel at times, or a fulfillment channel, whether that's just delivery to the customer out of a store's inventory, or it's, using the store essentially as a curbside pickup channel. So I think, certainly we've seen less interest in brick and mortar, but I think there also just will still be a role. It'll just be a much different role than what we've seen in the past. And I think that was true prior to COVID as well.
Yeah, addressing that change. I have a question here that's come in that's asking, with the digitalization of fashion industry, what do you predict will be the future of the market in, say, 10, 20 years? So, have you got that crystal ball? Will virtual clothing's become a thing, or will AR dominate the industry?
Yeah, I think I'll take one sort of theme and hit on that. I think that clothing will become much more customized. I think there will continue to be customized and personalized. I think there will continue to be a demand for less waste, not just necessarily building large amounts of product based on forecasts and predictions, but actually understanding consumer demand in real time and building personalized product to meet that demand. And if you think about 3D tools around, digitization of design, if you think about 3D printing capabilities and new manufacturing and fabrication capabilities, there is a reality where clothing will be much more personalized, and there'll be a lot less wasted clothing that was mass produced. And, getting back to the brick and mortar theme, we've already seen certain brands and fashion retailers who are doing personalization in their stores, who are bringing 3D printers into their stores, who are, putting holes in jeans in their stores, doing things to sort of bring that personalization dynamic at a sort of low level. But I think that will accelerate significantly, and it'll help with the environmental impact of retail, while also helping retailers connect more closely with their consumers.
I think that leads very nicely on to our next question from Ella Sharp. There's been an interest in production on demand, almost made to order, so consumer to business to consumer. How could a PLM support this?
So great question. Yeah, very linked to what I was just hitting on. I do think that will become, a reality at some point for sure. And PLM, I think, will really connect deeply with the 3D collaboration tools. You'll see sort of a hybridization of those two capabilities that today are generally coming from separate vendors in the fashion space. If you look at other industries, oftentimes that's already happened. If you look at discrete manufacturing, we're already seeing, a deep connection between 3D tools and PLM and then manufacturing. And I think you'll see the same thing in fashion, where what the 3D tool is allowing and what PLM is allowing become much more hybrid and combined, and do allow for that personalization and consumer input. So yes, I do see a role for PLM. I think it's deeply connected to 3D.
Yeah, brilliant. And then we just have one last question. Have you seen any demand for customer engaging softwares like virtual try-ons or?
Absolutely. We work closely. We have a partner called TrueFit based out of Boston, but have a broad connection, or a deep client base in the fashion industry. And what they do is they take data on your, they take personalized data on sort of what product has fit you in the past. So, they might ask you, would you rather, and excuse me, I'm going to use stateside examples just because of my own knowledge, but, does a J. Crew shirt or a Brooks Brothers shirt tend to fit you better? Do you wear a J. Crew large but a Brooks Brothers medium? And by taking a few of those inputs, and then also by monitoring sales data and returns data, TrueFit is basically able to provide personalized insights on the e-commerce platform about how a product might fit, when you should size up, when you should size down. And so we do see a lot of interest in that. We think it's very exciting. And again, when you get into a scenario where people are ordering more and more clothing online, it's more and more important that they make that right decision on the size with the initial buy, because if they potentially return the product, which of course the retailer has to support, generally we're seeing free shipping returns and, very fast shipping on returns, but that's ultimately going to sink the retailer margin. So it's really important to provide that insight within the e-commerce engine, so that, their consumers are making that right choice first.
Well, I think the statistic here in the UK is that in-store returns, product that's bought in store, is less than 10%. But when you're looking at a product that's bought online, returns, we're looking at more like 50, maybe 40, 50, 60%. So significant difference. So I think, big cost for a business. Got some more questions that have come in actually. Does Bamboo Rose partner with any institutions on sustainability? thinking about what processes, regulations and standards need to be observed through the supply chain?
So the short answer is yes. There's none that I can name publicly at this moment, but we today, we're letting kind of our client base that are leaders in that area, that have deep knowledge of that area, they're sort of working with us and indicating to us what institutions they expect to be working with, what institutions they expect that they would like to be adherent to. And then we're working with those institutions to ensure that those standards are populated on our system, so that retailers can maintain adherence to those regulations and ensure their supplier base are maintaining adherence to those regulations as well. In the near future, we will have some announcements that go into a little more depth on that topic, but they're just not quite live yet. But essentially, retailers can indicate the different regulations and institutional standards that they want their supplier base and partners to be adherent to. And then our system allows them to manage that and continually check that in an automated way to reduce risk around that.
And then how will the evolution of technology in product lifecycle management change the role of the fashion buyer and merchandiser?
I think,
yeah, go on.
Yeah, I think it's, first, openness to technology. Some of those roles, there's understandably been a feeling that it's largely a gut feel approach. And so I think, PLM tools and other tools will allow, deeper data input into some of those decisions around assortment and product strategy. And so the ability to analyze that data, to pull out that data, I think will be important. Also 3D, 3D is an area where it's a skill set we see the suppliers taking on a little bit more today. I think those in school now are probably learning more about 3D and are being trained on certain 3D products. But we do see that as a demand and an interest for our clients. And so I think having capabilities and understanding of those tools and the ability to use those tools, which can be somewhat complex. I think they're getting more simple, but they are complex design tools and they need to be complex to really meet the needs of the stakeholder. But I think those will be important tools moving forward and certainly a good skill to have that I think our client base certainly is looking for in the market.
Yeah, interestingly, we had a talk last night by Michael Page, as a recruiter here in the UK, and Rachel Dixon came in, who's actually heads up the recruitment of buyers and merchandisers, and she echoed very much what you're saying there, Nate. The need for buyers and merchandisers to be far more analytical, but also more digital savvy and welcoming of these new digital systems and processes. Otherwise, then they're not going to have a point of difference within the recruitment market. Mm-hmm. So I think that brings us to the end of today. Thank you very much, Nate. We really appreciate your time today. Some really valuable insights into product lifecycle management and some of the possible solutions to the disruptions that we've seen in recent months. And yes, as you quite rightly highlighted, we are possibly returning to normal, but what actually does that new normal look like? Exciting times, because product lifecycle management has been around long before COVID. But I think what COVID has done is accelerated some of these innovations. From that perspective, we should see it as an exciting time rather than, So thank you very much. Really appreciate your time. And thank you to all of you attending. And I look forward to seeing you next week for our last of this term's Fashion Means Business Fashion Talks. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for having me, Hannah. And thank you for the great questions from the audience. Those were great.
Brilliant. Okay. Thank you. Have a good day. Take care.
Awesome. Thanks.
See you. Bye-bye.